When I arrived at Rambert, the dancers did predominantly classical class. The majority of work they were doing was in the world of Glenn Tetley or Christopher Bruce. And at that time, it was therefore a mixture of Graham and classical. So it was something quite different to the style in which I worked. And when I came there, I was asked to go there as resident choreographer. I said, well, I will only come if I can teach. And so they, at that time, had 3 classical classes a week and 2 modern classes with me. So I think their way of dancing began to gently change. And once I was director, 6 years later, the dancers had a meeting and said to me, you've commissioned work from Sue Davis, from Siobhan Davis, from Michael Clark, from Ian Spink, and your own work, and we use our back so much, we really need 3 modern classes a week and 2 classical. And that was, to me, a great change, a great point of the company becoming something else. Well, I joined them as resident choreographer, and that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to choreograph. So any change I made was really through my choreography, through what I asked them to do in my pieces. They also changed my choreography because I was very happy to develop my work to take notice, if you like, of their classical training. Most of them came from a classical background, and so it definitely influenced my work. And so I wanted to use that gift. There were 2 things at Rambert that were outstanding for me. These very able classical dancers who were open to doing things that were modern, and then the musicians. To have 14, 16 musicians was like a huge asset for me, and it opened up totally the ability to work with music, with live music, which was a huge step forward for me. So the first 6 years of my life there were pretty carefree. I had a great time, and I really developed my work. And the way I developed my work was to take good notice of the skills that the dancers had from most of them had quite strong classical training. So I began to involve certain things like line and fast small steps and fast turns, all of which are in both pieces that are on this video. And I think that's really how the company influenced my work. And if I influenced them, it was by teaching them twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever, to prepare them to do my work. So they didn't become pure Cunningham dancers. They became, the dancers that I worked with were very, very confident and knowledgeable about what kind of movement I wanted over the 12 years that I was there. I woke up one morning and found myself artistic director at Rambert. It happened very quickly. I had to help deal with a very difficult situation. I really, really enjoyed being resident choreographer. I loved that, frankly, that irresponsibility. The responsibility was interesting, and for the first few years, really stimulating. Rambert herself once said that if the Royal Ballet was the National Gallery, then she would like to think that Rambert was perhaps the Tate. And I did feel like I was looking after a gallery, since I was acquiring pieces, just the way you might acquire sculptures or paintings. I would acquire a piece by Merce Cunningham, by Tricia Brown. We would revive a piece by Anthony Tudor. We did a wide range of work, and I felt very much that I was the curator, I really enjoyed looking after those works, and I think I learned a lot. I had to make sure that Tudor was done the way it should be done. I had to make sure that Cunningham, particularly because I knew about that technique, and it's one reason why Merce trusted the company. He knew that I knew his work really well. And then, of course, being given work by Tricia Brown was like so exciting. We were the first company in the whole world, other than her own, to do her work. We did Opal Loop. When I became artistic director, Rambert was categorically a repertoire company. It was often hinted that there shouldn't be more than one ballet by a particular choreographer in any one program. So the thing that I believed in was to try and make a repertoire where an evening would still feel coherent. Sometimes you go and see a repertory program in a ballet company or whatever, and the pieces are so different that you could say something for everyone, or you could say there's going to be something which everyone hates. And I thought I would really like to try and explore the range of dance where movement was of paramount importance. And that's really what I was trying to do. And Siobhan Davis became associate choreographer, and she made wonderful pieces for us. Embark, Winnsboro Cotton Mill Blues, really amazing pieces. Sounding, they had a terrific energy, and she could explore structure with large groups of people in a way that wasn't so totally nurturing of individual dancers, which is the way she used to work with her own company. So I always used to love the pieces that she made for us. I suppose I would, wouldn't I? But I wanted the repertoire to be something that the audience could sit through an evening of 3 or 4 different pieces, and they would actually see the dancers and understand that within the range of what was going on, there was something in common. There was something, it was like a like-minded repertoire company. That either worked for people or it didn't. I think as artistic director, you probably always face challenges. Sometimes the challenges led me into exciting territory. When I had asked all the choreographers who I knew and admired in Britain to make work when I first took over, and it was the 60th anniversary of the company. A year or so later, the board started chivying me to, as they put it, dream, and to really ask the choreographers I would really love, but didn't think they would possibly do it, but I should be brave. So I wrote to Tricia Brown, and Tricia Brown sent me a postcard back saying, "Let's talk." That's all it said. "Dear Richard, let's talk." And so she came to London, and we talked, and we did do Opal Loop. And so that was a way of a board actually allowing me to be braver than I thought I was. But I think all the issues of fundraising and keeping the company going, we won all sorts of prizes. We won every prize in the book, at which point everything seemed to be rosy. And then, unfortunately, it's a fact of life that once you've won all the prizes, you don't win them again if you won the Prudential Award or the Digital Award or whatever. And so the financial pressure became greater. And so in the end, it was very, very exhausting. And when I left Rambert, it was really wonderful to get back into the studio and not have to go to a single meeting. It was a great, great freedom. Both pieces, Wildlife and Strong Language, are very much about collaboration. They had very different origins. Under the previous directorship, the accent of Rambert was very much about accessible work. And I wanted to make something with a contemporary composer, with a contemporary artist, that actually could be attractive and interesting and engage an audience. That was one of the things I wanted to do with wildlife. The origins of wildlife, when I spoke with Nigel and we were talking about music from across the world, tied in very much with my fascination with different cultures all over the world. When I was a student, there was an amazing exhibition in London called Architecture Without Architects, which I absolutely loved, and it became a book by Bernard Rudowski. And it was pictures of the most extraordinary African huts and Mediterranean villages in Santorini, for instance, before it became a kind of playground. And all these extraordinary buildings which came out of people's needs, people's community conditions. And I loved that, and I've always been fascinated by not jolly folk dance, but real folk dance that tells you something about people's existence. So in wildlife, I think I tried to imagine a place where these movements were the indigenous folk dance, they were the indigenous language. And the kites that Dick Smith designed for wildlife were the jungle of that particular part of the world, were the trees or whatever. And the music with all its amazing sounds, the fluttering flutes of bird-catching children, the stuttering trumpets of New Guinea, some sort of morning, wakening chorus, the lilt of the African marimba, all these beautiful things. I was very happy when Nigel said this is what he would like to incorporate. And when we made the dance, he gave me little tiny short recordings, because this is before digital age, before synthesizers, before all the kind of things that can happen now. So he got the musicians together at Rambert and made little, what he called maquettes, little tiny sequences, clusters of sound, so I could feel the sound world of that particular section. We divided the sections. So that's how I was able to start. And then when the music arrived, as it does when it's instrumental music, it arrives quite late. Then they recorded the whole thing downstairs, and then the movement just flew. I had to make the piece very quickly, and I did, and it was very exciting. Strong Language, I made originally as a piece with a different name for a company, a smaller company than Rambert, called Extemporary, independent dancers. I was commissioned by Emlyn Clade to make a piece for them, and I thought it would be really exciting to do something different. And I had met alongside them a young composer who worked with sounds that he recorded in his studio and who then evolved them into rhythmic patterns. So I decided to work with John Mark Gowans, and he gave me little, again, in a similar way, but digitally or on recording, he gave me little nuggets of sound. And I made all the different sections, either to a particular rhythm that he had in that sound, or there's one very flowing section where the women wear pleated skirts and the movement is very lyrical. And that we simply made quite a long dance. We made it entirely on counts. Very simple, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3, and 1, 2, and 3, sharp, lyrical. It was like that. And when John Mark then made the sound, he put layer upon layer upon layer. So the dancers had to count like demons because there were so many. It's what made the music interesting. It's what made the dance and the music together have a wonderful pull. But in order to keep to that original phrase of 2 3s and a 2, they really had to count. So that was the other way of working. And then it had very fashionable, cool clothes by Catherine Hamnett, and they worked very, very well. And I think what I was trying to do was make a piece which reflected my sense of fun at the time. Probably too old to do it now, but at that time, it was quite fun to make strong language. And it was supposed to be really, there was no question about it, I was really hoping that the audience would enjoy it. I didn't know that they would enjoy it as much as they did. It was my first hit, and I was very surprised. I'd never had one before, and I was delighted. I think that all those elements came together. I think, to me, strong language is very much of its time. I've never revived it, and that's really why, because I think it rather belonged to the 80s when it was made. And it was in the early years of when I was artistic director. So in a funny sort of way, both pieces were proving a point. Wildlife was saying you could be quite demanding and still be enjoyable. Strong language was saying you could make very complicated movement and very complicated speed and rhythm and still make it extremely accessible and something which the audience could very readily enjoy. So there were two different approaches. I've always been fascinated by the pure side of dance, by the complexity of dance, and then by how on earth one can make that readily both visible and accessible to an audience in the theatre. I've made pieces about different cultures, but they are about more recognizable human beings. I made a wonderful Canadian composer called Claude Vivier. He wrote a piece called Pula Dewata, which is about Balinese culture, and I made that for Rambert. And of course, about 10 years ago, I made a piece for Shobana Jayasingh, where the young women who danced for me were completely trained in Bharatnatyam, and we danced to Purcell, so that was a wonderful mixture. And that, I think, is what gave me the courage to work with Vidya Patel on Italian recently, where I worked on different cultures again. I love the way that dance reaches across barriers. It's something which everyone around the world does. And if it's a country that doesn't dance, watch out, it's a dangerous country. When I make a dance, I make it very quickly. I'm a very quick maker, and then I'm a very slow decision maker. I stand back and I look at it, and ever since being at Rambert, I've always gone on tour with the company I'm working with, and so I can then sit in a different place in the theatre. With Rambert, it would be night after night. We used to do Tuesday to Saturday, every place we went, for 12 years. I know those theatres like the back of my hand. We still go back to them now with my company. I learn all the time from what I make in the studio and how it's seen in the theatre, and whether the two mesh or whether the two differ. I've known choreographers who have an extraordinary eye for what's going to be in the theatre. Merce was one. Merce would make this complicated piece in the studio, and you'd think it was so complicated no one was ever going to be able to see it. And then you'd go into a theatre, and it would be visibly so clear because he knew how to see something from a distance. I have to go into the theatre and see what works and what doesn't. I'm quite prepared to admit that. But I've learned over the years I'm more knowledgeable about it than I used to be. And when I change things, it's usually not to be more clever, but to be clearer, to try and make it clearer to an audience. So I usually simplify things rather than add to them. Sometimes I make a complicated dance that just falls into place. Isthmus is a very good example, and I've really hardly changed it. I've done a new version, remixed, but I'm very, very fascinated by what I think of as the glorious complexity of dance. And if you can make it quickly with a light touch, then it's something which is living and breathing. It's not a great big hefty piece of athletics. It's often something that's very clear, very fast, very articulate, with a light, speedy rhythm. And there are sections of strong language in particular that are like that.